let me frame kind of difficult for you as well. When I say difficult client, I don't necessarily think that any client that has expectations is difficult by nature of having expectations. I feel like if any of us go to a fast food restaurant and I say no ketchup on my burger, I have expectations of no ketchup on my burger. Like I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that I'm out of my mind for that. You know what I mean? So I don't feel like if clients, because, when you're dealing with the dollar amount we're dealing with a lot of times, and this has also been something that's been across the board at every place I've worked, I have the expectations that you will have expectations. I mean, I hope you do. I mean, if your company puts you in charge to run these events, I hope that you have an expectation that it's going to go well. What ends up happening with clients that can be difficult is when things go wrong. So when things go wrong, you get to kind of see the true character of a person, right? Are they running around like a chicken with their head cut off? Are they manic now, panicking and stuff like that? And I don't believe in panicking. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it solves anything. You got to have a clear-cut plan and be able to implement your plan with some form of confidence. It's not to say that everything is going to go perfect, but you should be able to pivot with a plan and versus just making it up on the fly. And some clients literally are making it up on the fly. I don't see a lot of those, very few of those, but I've seen them throughout the years.
Welcome to Events Demystified podcast, where we explore and demystify the world of in-person, virtual, hybrid event AV production and technology by sharing insightful tips, tricks and tactics to make your events a success. This podcast is brought to you by Tree Fan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency. And your host is 𝐂𝐚𝐻𝐿𝐿, a technical event planner and producer with almost 2 decades of hands-on technical experience in event production.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Events Demystified podcast, your one-stop shop for tangible, technical, and practical planning advice for anyone in the events industry. This podcast is brought to you by Tree Fan Events, a woman-owned event production agency, and I am your host, 𝐂𝐚𝐻𝐿𝐿 Tree Fan. We are going to dive into events, but also we're going to dive into a little bit of the mental and physical fitness that goes hand in hand with being a well-rounded event professional that can function really well the day of the event, because we all know events can be quite stressful and they do take a toll on your mind, but also on your body. With that being said, as we all know, the demanding nature of event planning can be taxing for a lot of us, and that is why it's essential to maintain a healthy body and mind to meet the challenges that come with each one of the events that we work on. Needless to say, mental and physical fitness are crucial to success for event professionals, and by taking care of ourselves, we can also be more effective in our roles and provide the best service to our clients. As such, this focus that we started this season of the podcast, the focus on mental and physical fitness, is just as important as talking strategy for events. If we make it a priority to incorporate healthy habits into our daily routine to ensure that we can perform at our best in this exciting and challenging industry, then no event is too challenging to tackle. As you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this topic just because I know how important it is. And I can tell you that I've gone to great length to make sure that when I'm on a show site, I can function at the 100% of my capacity. And that means putting enough time pre-show into my health, into my physical conditioning, and also my mental fitness. Today, I'm super excited to bring on someone that we are going to tackle the events. Also, what does it take to actually work with challenging clients? And how do we deal with difficult staff? And how do we deal with the pressure of running high-profile events? And for that, I would love to introduce to you my guest today, Reggie Johnson, event manager at Bold Events in Atlanta, where he's been managing and running events for the last 7 years, ranging from events for presidents, rappers, authors, influencers, to weddings and bar mitzvahs. He started as an audio engineer and was in the IT field before working at Bold Events, also owned a computer business with a partner and did radio in Mississippi. once at Bold Events, Reggie has been working on all types of events in all types of spaces, ranging from a hole in the wall type of a nightclub to celebrities' mansions and the state capitol, which has really gave him this whole-rounded experience when it comes to dealing with all types of clients, vendors, and has seen the event flow and the event timeline basically from all sides of view. That led him to managing and training other event managers on how to deal with difficult clients and managing client expectations. He's also the host of a podcast called Reg in ATL, and it is my great pleasure now to bring him on and start this conversation with him. Welcome to the show, Reggie. How are you doing today?
That was an amazing intro. I'm doing even better now. I was doing great, but after that intro, now I feel like I'm doing super great. It's amazing. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, with such a great sounding microphone, I mean, I would think that you'd be doing really good. I'm so actually excited to be talking to you today because I feel like we have a bit of a similar trajectory when it comes to our event upbringing into the event industry. And before we dive into all the things that I mentioned that we will touch on today, I would love for you to take a moment and give our audience a bit of a well-rounded picture of how did you get where you are today? What is something that lights your soul on fire personally and professionally?
Well, the event journey started actually the same time as my audio engineering journey. And they both started around actually 2008. I've worked with several different event companies, and the range is incredible. So when I very first started, it was doing audio engineering, and it was at a club. It was like kind of like a nightclub type situation. And they would throw events there, but those events would be like very music based, like bands would come in and we'd do an event for a band or something like that. They even had like wrestling there at one point, but I was never there on the wrestling nights. I was only there for the music nights, which went very long. But I started that, and I started doing events at the same time because events was kind of like a side situation.
Mm-hmm.
I had a studio. I was doing more of the audio engineering at the time. And I started doing that, did that for like 2 or 3 years, and then started wanting to do my own business, wanting to open a computer store, which is what I did with a friend of mine. Computers was naturally what I did. So that came about by me fixing his computer. And he asked me, why don't you do this for a living? And I said, I just never really thought about it. I don't want... computers are so intensive to people, right? Like, I don't want to ruin somebody's computer, and then I'll feel so bad about it. Like, I can ruin my own and it's not a problem, but I don't want to ruin yours. That's a bigger issue. So I was
especially if you didn't back up your data, right?
Exactly. And now I got to explain that. So I'm like, no, I'm not really into that. But he convinced me. We started doing it on Craigslist. This is about 3 years in. So during this 3 years from
this is when Craigslist used to be a business model.
Yes, it was. I would go on Craigslist, advertise our business, and we had a niche. So we would pick up your computer. Let's say that you're going to work, and let's say you go to work like 8 o'clock in the morning. Our niche at that time, because we didn't have a store, we'd go pick up your computer, and then we'd bring it back before you ever got off. So we were like, that's our niche. We'll have it fixed before you even get off work. So there was already pressure there
for people on Craigslist to give their computers to this made up business per se.
It is. And it's incredible. It's incredible the amount of places I went with that business. It's incredible the amount of places I would go. It's similar to the events business. Like in the events business, if you're wearing something that says that you're events, you can walk into anywhere. And people don't even question you for being there.
True. I might have crashed a few parties in Vegas, let's just say, just by walking in like I own the space.
Yes. And that's the strategy. You got to walk in there like you're supposed to be there. You know what I mean? And I did that the same thing when I was doing computers. I go to these big buildings in Atlanta, and I come in and I fix maybe 2 or 3 computers because some weren't in a position for me to take them because they needed them right then. So more like a 2 or 3 hour turnaround versus somebody else's that I could pick up and then have like a 7-8 hour turnaround, easier to kind of get parts and stuff like that. So started doing that. Then moved to Mississippi because my partner moved to Mississippi, and he was like, we should open a store doing that out here. That was 2 years later. So now we're in 2013. And the whole time I'm still doing some events, and I still had my studio doing my audio engineering stuff. At that point, move out to Mississippi, go out there, start fixing computers, iPhones, picked up iPhones, tablets, and stuff like that. So we're doing all that stuff out there now. And that's like a brick and mortar, much harder business because of overhead and stuff like that. Started doing that. And then let me see, that was for about 2 years. I moved back to Atlanta. My partner was running it in Mississippi. And that's when I started at Bold. at the time. And I never, when I started at Bold at the time, I never really thought that was going to be a long-term situation. I would just went in like, hey, this is just another job. I already have a store, I already have a source of income. So it was nice. But I will say that most of my experience and most of the things that I would tell you in this podcast are probably coming from all the places that I worked at. They're not necessarily just Bold, but they come from all my event experiences, which have been vastly different depending on clientele, where you work, and stuff of that nature.
For sure. And honestly, as someone that has started similarly in radio at first, and then when I moved to LA, I actually was doing a lot of audio engineering, front of house, sound mixing for bands, many of which were in some of those bars, which, like you said, it's interesting now that I would go back and be like, man, I definitely put myself in some precarious situations.
Yes.
Kept safe, however. Yeah, but I also got a lot of opportunity when I was doing those side gigs. I remember one time I was in a bar somewhere in LA and I mixed Lincoln Park. And it was so awesome to actually have them in this establishment. Like, those are big deal guys. Like, they're throwing a private show and I'm here mixing sound for them. It's like a lot of those little events like that sort of helped me get to a place where I was like, I built enough confidence to actually do something else or start my own thing versus, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing and burn out, because eventually you will burn out. Those,
Yes.
side gigs take a lot of time in and out, loading, rehearsals, and late into the night. And then the next day you might have another job and it's just you're rolling like day in and day out and you can't really tell if it's day or night anymore. So I'm curious, as you're thinking of your journey, have you had any particular challenges, personal, professional, that you needed to overcome in order to become the well-rounded event professional that you are today?
I think it's just being malleable to the change. And you're going to see that be like a constant theme of this conversation because times change, people change. And I think that working in those earlier audio engineering in those settings, because you just described the exact setting, like that's exactly how it is. Like, it's long, you can get burned out on it very quick. So, and you're dealing with a total different type of human being, so to speak. You're dealing with a total different type of set of people here.
You
So
also add a bit of the intoxication to the mix, and things can escalate fast.
Very wild. Let's just say that. Some very wild environments in those audio engineering days. Very different from kind of the corporate setup of kind of events. You know what I mean? The corporate structure of events versus dealing with that. But at the same time, I do feel like it prepared me for dealing with all types of individuals. You know what I mean? Dealing with all types of different people, all different work walks of life, all different types of socioeconomic people from across the board. So I would say that that's probably the biggest thing that I kind of had to overcome, is just dealing with the different types and finding out how you can achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve with a whole different mindset, or with the people that have a whole different mindset than the previous people that you were dealing with.
And what did stepping out of your comfort zone look like for you as you were trying to overcome some of those challenges and also pursue, things that you're passionate about?
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier when it's kind of like going to people's places, right? Like going to people's houses, being in their personal space. Like it's weird, because there aren't a lot of jobs where you're going to just be in somebody's house, or there's not a lot of jobs where you're going to be with such an intimate space for somebody. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that the computer job in general probably prepared me for that a lot, because I did end up going to people's houses a lot, and maybe I'm in their living room and their kids are doing homework and they're like living their life around you. You're just in there. So it's kind of like dealing with that gave me the comfort zone to be in any kind of situation, in any kind of environment, and have that comfort be set. But it wasn't easy to do. And in the first few times that I had to do that, it was very weird. It felt very weird.
Well, I can tell you that there's certainly a difference between your regular Joe house, who knows what you're going to get yourself into, versus working into somebody's mansion because you're doing a party or planning an event in their backyard. Yes. And that's a completely setup, right? I don't remember feeling anxious when I was walking some of those places, but I would certainly feel a little anxious if I was going to, I don't know, somebody's house random on the street that I've never met in my life. I'm like, this is weird. Even though if you think about it, there could be issues on either side of the spectrum.
Absolutely. You're literally going to somebody's house. It can get weird.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now that we got to know you a bit more, because again, I'm all about knowing the real person behind the scenes, behind the facade, because we all like to put on a facade at first,
Yeah.
And if you're not able to open up and just talk, you would with a friend, like I feel like we don't get to the bottom of who you really are. So I appreciate when people are willing to be just themselves and leave all that stuff at the door or whatever. So this gives me now the ability to get into our main topic. How do we overcome challenges that involve sometimes dealing with difficult clients and even dealing with difficult staff members and maybe vendors or suppliers that you bring on for your event? So to start this, right, what about giving this description of the persona of what a difficult person looks like? Are there any red flags that should be aware of right off the bat?
I feel like you know that within the first few conversations with somebody. And what that looks like for me is from an organizational standpoint, whether it's here at Bold or even when I was working at studios or other places, from an organizational standpoint, how together does that person have it? Because, when dealing with events, there's itineraries, these are time-based. There's going to be a lot of people that vary across the board on their organization and stuff like that. So if you are dealing with somebody who's not necessarily as organized themselves, you're going to have to kind of take the reins yourself, which I don't necessarily mind doing now, to be honest with you, because I'm the professional. And a lot of times this might be 2 to 3 a year for them. And if it's a wedding, hopefully they're only getting married like once this year. I don't know, but they're doing hopefully 1 or 2 events a year for them. And to me, it's 1 to 200. So I've done this so many times. I should be able to provide some kind of guidance, and let me frame kind of difficult for you as well. When I say difficult client, I don't necessarily think that any client that has expectations is difficult by nature of having expectations. I feel like if any of us go to a fast food restaurant and I say no ketchup on my burger, I have expectations of no ketchup on my burger. Like I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that I'm out of my mind for that. You know what I mean? So I don't feel like if clients, because, when you're dealing with the dollar amount we're dealing with a lot of times, and this has also been something that's been across the board at every place I've worked, I have the expectations that you will have expectations. I mean, I hope you do. I mean, if your company puts you in charge to run these events, I hope that you have an expectation that it's going to go well. What ends up happening with clients that can be difficult is when things go wrong. So when things go wrong, you get to kind of see the true character of a person, right? Are they running around like a chicken with their head cut off? Are they manic now, panicking and stuff like that? And I don't believe in panicking. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it solves anything. You got to have a clear-cut plan and be able to implement your plan with some form of confidence. It's not to say that everything is going to go perfect, but you should be able to pivot with a plan and versus just making it up on the fly. And some clients literally are making it up on the fly. I don't see a lot of those, very few of those, but I've seen them throughout the years. And fortunately for me, this is like single digit percentage. Like I don't see a ton of this in my business throughout the years.
I feel like I've certainly have had experience with, especially say a brand new development director that's working with this large organization. And this is their first large event. For us, it's not the first large event. For them, it is. And then they just go back and forth like this zigzagging squirrel between like ideas and decisions. And I'm like, you need to pick like a straight line and go with it. Like you can't just be going in a million places at once and expecting everything to just like jump like this. And I'm telling you, when you're in that place, you're like just patiently waiting for them to decide what is it that they want to do. We're going to make it happen. But until you can formulate verbally what you want, like we're just watching you go crazy, right? Basically.
And a lot of times that's exactly it, right? You're literally watching them do it because you've been through this already. So you already know kind of the roadmap, so to speak. You already know kind of how it's going to go if you've done enough of these. So you're just kind of watching them figure it out, like waiting to kind of figure it out. Because a lot of times what I see with people who don't plan a lot of events or do a lot of events is they want to try to plan perfection. They want to plan for every single thing that may possibly happen, right? But you're dealing a lot of times with anywhere from 30, 40 to thousands of people. Dude, you just can't. You can't do it. You got to have a plan. You got to stick to your plan and then pivot as issues kind of present themselves to you,
And also not sweat the small details. Like I've seen that happen a lot where an event planner or someone that's in charge of certain aspects of the event, they would spend so much time focusing on some minuscule, small detail that has no importance in the overall plan of the event. And time is wasted on that one thing when actually this is the the reason why we're here. How about we look at the big picture and then we implement the steps to create that? And it's true. That's when it takes so much skill and people skill, especially on our side, to be able to sometimes like even guide some of those difficult clients to the place where they can make those decisions in a way that they can breathe and then come with whatever it is that they need, so we can work together as a team in implementing that.
I think that you bring up a solid point there. And that's why I feel like we're the professionals. It's on us to alleviate some of these concerns, you know, even with just saying what we have done in the past, what we've seen in the past. Because a lot of times if you're going like a site visit or a walkthrough, or you're dealing with even some of the bands that would kind of come in back in the day, you're kind of guiding them and just alleviating concerns. Like, I understand that you're concerned about X, but that's happened 1 out of like 1,000 events I've ever done. Like, it's such an outlier that I don't know if we spend a lot of time on it, but I feel like it's on us to alleviate those concerns, because the common factor that I've seen a lot of these events throughout the years is nobody wants to throw a crappy event. Like, everybody wants to throw an event that's going to be nice and for whoever their guest is, whatever the host is, whether it's corporate, whether it's social, no matter the socioeconomic scale. So I feel like it's on us as professionals to kind of alleviate those concerns.
Absolutely. So what is then the secret sauce to hosting this successful event with less than, say, ideal staff, less than ideal client, especially when you're managing different vendors and you have multiple people involved in the event, and sometimes even more chefs in the kitchen that there should be?
Yes. And this business is a lot of chefs in the kitchen business, because I train other managers. I tell them all the time, you're going to have several different vendors. And, you know, a lot of these vendors, me personally, I know how to relate to them because a lot of them are small businesses. You know what I mean? Whether it's like a floral company, whether it's a design company, whether it's an audio visual company, whether it's just a DJ, like these are all individual small businesses. So I can relate. Like, you're trying to put your best foot forward so you can get more business. And I think that it starts there. So the first place it starts is relate to your client, relate to what their concerns are. Like, don't just brush them off as like, oh, that never happens, who cares? Like, you know, you have to kind of see where they're coming from, see where that concern is. And you can do that across the board. What I found that's easier is just humanizing people, to be honest with you. You just got to humanize, and you got to humanize all of them. Like, you know, whether it's the DJ, he might only be one person, and you might have a floral company that's a whole team of people, but his or her concerns are no less unimportant. You know what I mean? Like, they're just as important as a bigger company and stuff like that. So I believe humanizing goes a long way.
I remember I was working on a very large stadium size event once, and we had a DJ that was playing the intro music for a lot of the keynote speakers. And the DJ requested that he would have a preview monitor so he can see. So it made sense visually, because you're behind the stage, you're behind, you know, walls of LED screens and pipe and drape. So for you to queue up the right, you know, yes, you have a show caller, yes, you have a technical director in your ears and all the things, but visually, like, to also see that it wasn't a huge request. It also wasn't necessarily like top of the list for us, you know, either, but making that DJ happy, like by just providing him with a TV screen that acted like a preview monitor, made it like he was the happiest person on that group. And it wasn't a big deal, right? So it's like you said, it just took a little bit of extra effort to provide him with something that made his job so much easier. And you can tell that DJ actually became like my best friend. And I'm like,
that's all it took, huh?
That's all it took. He's like a DSM monitor to make the DJ happy. But you're right. It's like having empathy for the situation or whatever the circumstance each one of those vendors or suppliers might be in. It's definitely an important element of making everyone happy. And when you make them happy, you know they're going to have your back. And I feel like that's so important, especially if you're managing events, to know that you have the backup of all the people involved. Because if it's not just a matter of when things go wrong, but, you know, when things go wrong, hopefully you have a backup plan. But if things go wrong, you know, you're going to have a support system to help troubleshoot whatever it is that might need troubleshooting. And many of those things happen behind the scenes where the audience is not even aware. But if you're the only person concerned with trying to figure things out because everyone else is looking at you and be like, well, you were a jerk before, and I'm not going to do anything about it right now to help you, it's not going to help you long term, right?
It does not at all.
So what has been, in your experience from working some of those diverse events, the most surprising or maybe shocking element of running events?
I would say the biggest shock actually came when I very first got in. So the biggest shock was the cost of events. And this is something that's been kind of consistent, but it's just enjoying, because I think if you're looking at events and you're just attending them, you don't have an appreciation for all the things that it went to put together, right? All the amount of vendors it went to put. If you're just going to an event and you're just sitting at a table and getting drinks, to put that together could have been 4 or 5 different companies, like just to put that situation together. So dealing with the cost, I remember when I very first started, would have been like 2008-ish. I was doing an event at the High Museum, which is a museum here in Atlanta. And they had a charcuterie, like a little charcuterie board, and it cost like $4,000 or $5,000. And I remember thinking, like, what? Like 4 or 5 grand for like a cheese board? Like, are you kidding me? So I remember looking at those prices back then and being like, this is amazing. I can't believe the cost that goes into every aspect of throwing these events. So would say that's probably the biggest shock I got. I'm well used to it now, but back then when I was first getting into it, I was like, that's like half my studio setup is this cheese board. Like that's my studio setup. That's what I have in my studio. You know, I'm paying for my Pro Tools. I'm paying for my Mac. It costs less than this cheese board. So yeah, I remember that being a very big shock for me, especially going from like one industry to the next.
Absolutely. I remember actually, I can relate to that because I was helping a friend with a wedding just recently last year in December, and she did a lot of like do-it-yourself type of situations. So I'm like there to help her. I'm like, whatever you need, I'll help you with. And one of those situations was, how about we make this widespread, 2 tables long cheese charcuterie board, right? And I'm like, I'll help decorating, but don't put me in charge with going and getting the whatever it goes into that, because I've never created one of those, right?
Right.
I can Pinterest it, I suppose. So we end up going to the store to get a bunch of the stuff that requires. Apparently, there's a lot of things that go into that one charcuterie setup,
Yes.
right? So by the time we were done, like you're right, we're about like $5,000 in just the product. And we didn't even count for our labor, right? Like, it was free
Right.
labor at this point, right? It's like, we're just going to throw it on the table and make it look nice. And hopefully, everybody's going to enjoy it. But yeah, like little things like that. And by the time you think of a larger event, actually, one of the largest events I've done last year was at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And try to get that stadium ready for an event, full sold out event. Now think about rigging, think about the power, think about the elements that go into things that you're not even aware of, like having to cover that stadium with enough boarding or whatever so you don't destroy the grass. And then the security personnel, and then this person that's there just to oversee the lights and oversee the other thing. It's like by the time you're done, you're literally thousands upon thousands, adding to millions of dollars into just labor alone, and you didn't even bring in the food yet.
That's just for the event. That's just to like have the lights and to start it, to kind of set the frame of it, right?
Exactly.
It's incredible.
It is. So budget is obviously such a big topic in a lot of organizations, and event professionals definitely keep that on their mind, just because it's been so much fear in the air of what type of event should we do? What's the best ROI? What if people don't show up? What if we invest all this money and people are still concerned, about their safety and health and whatever? Regardless if we're in type of a bear market or a bull market, as event professionals, in order to produce outstanding events, you always have to keep that budget top of mind. So do you have any maybe cost effective strategies that you needed to implement for your events in order to produce an event that some of your clients would be like, well, we love to have an amazing event, but on a budget? What do we do? What can we do?
I think that's top of mind at a lot of spots, especially if you do corporate events, right? With weddings, some of these people have been thinking about their weddings, and some of the people have like endless budgets, and they've been thinking about that wedding for their entire life. So they're not as concerned as a corporate person that has to have a certain bottom line, and they don't want to go over it, So I think that the first thing you do is start seeing where you can slim down once you got everything. So you should think of everything you want, right? Once you think of everything you want, look at that number and then start taking stuff off the list.
Make a list. This is what I want. This is what I need. This would be nice to have. Unfortunately, this is where we need to be.
Yes. And then you start making your cuts. So you think of like the perfect event, and then you start making your cuts. And hopefully you're dealing with an event professional that can help guide you, because as you said before earlier in the show, some things just aren't as important and you're not getting a return on those investments. Like, does it make sense for you to spend X amount of dollars on something that maybe a couple people will use, where there's like a photo booth or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, you might have wanted a photo booth and you wanted like a band, or maybe you cut the band, keep the photo booth, go to a DJ. You see what I'm saying? Like, you start to see where you can cut. You can still provide the music, but DJ might be cheaper than a band depending on who you're getting. Maybe do you really need the photo booth? And I think that what becomes easier is doing events throughout the years to see how much things are used. So when you have these companies that are throwing annual events, they can have a point of reference. They can go back and say, well, last year we got this photo booth and like 7 people out of the 200 that showed up used it. So we can nix that off the list. And if you're dealing with somebody who has done events before, they can kind of guide you on that to where your dollar is going to go a little bit further for you. I mean, doing events is great, but who wants to just lose a ton of money on events? Like, I don't think that anybody wants to do that, and nobody wants to spend more than they have to, because it can be depressing. Like, I've seen events where people have rented out large cavernous spaces and nobody showed up, and I felt so bad for them, because I'm like, that's rough. Like, because you got to pay the money. Like, we know you're paying that money, like, and it's rough. So I think what you do is just think on the front end, think about what you were trying to accomplish. If you're a corporate, if you're doing team building, think about that. If you're doing a wedding, weddings can be a little bit different. If you're just doing like concerts, conventions and stuff like that, think about what the point of that is, that you're trying. What are you trying to convey? What do you hope that your audience or your guests get out of it? And then start trying to get back to that focus. Make sure that your fiscal kind of aligns with that focus. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I will tell you though, one of the biggest shockers, going back to that question that I've had, was one time when in LA, I was working on this multi-million-dollar wedding. And at that point, I've never worked on such a extensive wedding, which took 3 days. Just the wedding celebration itself. Obviously, it took us 4 days prior to that to set it up, and then another, day or two to just strike it. But it had, I think, 7 different locations. Each location have multiple bands. Each location have specific AV and lighting requirements and needs and decorations and flowers and food vendors and, drinks and all the things. I mean, the detail that went into that wedding at that level, it was something else. Yes, it was a Malibu wedding. Okay. Yes, it was overseeing the ocean and everything was, celebrity style. But it was just amazing to me. Just thinking about that, this is a one-time event, hopefully for some, like you said, not for everyone. But I'm like, wow, the amount of vendors, the amount of money, the amount of detail that went into this one wedding, it was beyond anything that I've experienced or I've worked on before. And it was just so interesting because, a wedding is not necessarily a event that you expect a return on investment, right? You're going to put a lot of expenses in, but you're not going to expect to like walk away with the same amount of dollars in your pocket.
Right.
Like, unless it's a Romanian wedding.
Where they're throwing money on the ground.
Because they will throw money at you on the ground. But for this, it's like, it's a huge capital that goes into an expense that goes into this one-time event. And yeah, for me, it was like, I guess it's like, if this is what you always dreamed of and wanted to do, it makes sense. But at the same time, like the frugal me was like, this feels like such a waste.
Yes, I 100% understand that, because you see it and you're like, I don't know what the return on this is going to be. Like, are weddings like a certain percentage happier with a dollar amount spent? Like, are you guaranteed never divorcing, spending over a certain dollar amount? I guess everybody would spend it. Like, but a lot that is just client preference. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you're dealing with
and status.
Yes. Because that varies very much depending on the status, right? Once you're of a certain status, socioeconomic class, you're expected to have like an over-the-top wedding.
Absolutely.
And whereas other people aren't dealing with those expectations.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Reggie, we're going to take a quick break over here just to acknowledge our podcast sponsor and supporter, but we'll be right back to continue our conversation. So don't go anywhere, and we'll see you in just a minute. Before we move any further, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our main sponsor, Trifan Events, which is a boutique event planning and production agency that will come alongside you, offering personalized event planning and technical support, strategic event design, production and technology management, and flawless execution for live, virtual, and hybrid events. The team at Trifan Events is passionate about planning and producing event experiences that get people involved with true moments of interaction, engagement, and co-creation, event while offering white glove treatment throughout the entire planning process, enabling you to reach your event goals with the use of creativity, production tools, and event technology. To find out how Trifun Events can plan and produce your event become memorable, go to trifunevents.com. Coming back to our conversation with Reggie Johnson, event manager at Bold Events, podcast host of Reg in ATL. Reggie, as I mentioned earlier, we have a bit of a similar background story. We both started fixing computers. I actually have a computer science degree that started when I was, in fifth grade, and I started fixing and upgrading, never-ending upgrade on this computer that I had at the time. It was just ridiculous, how much you can do with a Windows computer when you keep upgrading the memory and the hard drive and just keep going at it, right? And I feel like we also have, the similarity of working in radio for a while, and many years later, we started a podcast, and we both worked on events and managed events, and also events for quite some high profile clients as well. Some of the clients that I work with, I remember, as I mentioned, in LA were a lot of A-list celebrities, and I had the honor actually to mix for Michael Jackson and Fergie and Linkin Park, Britney Spears, I think it was Corinne Bale, Bailey Ray, and some of the best events actually were fashion events for a fashion designer named Cristiano 𝐂𝐻𝐭𝐫𝐬, which unfortunately is no longer with us. Now, when it comes to presidents, however, I have not done an event for a president, but I have done, a couple for some vice presidents like Al Gore and Joe Biden. Needless to say, I get what you mean when you say that those type of high profile events can be quite stressful. I remember when we were just doing this event, which was a corporate event where Joe Biden came to, at the time, Joe Biden was actually vice president, came to do, some type of recognition, and the security detail for that event, for that day, like literally took all of us like an entire day just to clear out the space, make sure that everybody's ready, make sure that nobody leaves once they're cleared out, right? So it's like a whole different level. And I'm curious from your experience of managing and running some of the events that you mentioned, which event has been the hardest to pull off? And for anyone curious about how to manage and deal with pressure of running high profile events, what are some of your top tips?
Okay, so the events that are hardest to pull off aren't always related to how famous a person may be. They're related more to logistics. Like, are you doing this event at a venue, or are you doing it in the middle of a field somewhere? So the middle of the field events are way harder no matter who it is. Because it's a field. It's a field, and you got to erect a venue. You got to have power. You got to have generators. There's more vendors. So those are always the hardest. The ones we're dealing with celebrities or dealing with high profile clients, because, that kind of vastly differs, because if you're going to deal with anybody from a government situation, you're going to deal with a lot more security, whether it's Secret Service or whether it's their local security here. You can deal a lot more with that when you're dealing with like a government official, whether it be a governor, whether it be a president, whether it be a mayor. Like, the security changes, but they're all similar in that sense when you're dealing with a government official. When you're dealing with other celebrities, you got maybe their handlers or something like that, and the security is there, but it's not as much as it is with dealing with the government officials. Versus when you're dealing with government, sometimes you got to give your information a couple days ahead of time so they can check you out. Like,
it's like, if you have something on your record, you better not show up the day of the event.
So you're dealing more so with that, but I would tell you that some of those events have been very, very amazing. Like, I really like the ones with dealing with certain government officials because they're just nice. You don't get the opportunity. Maybe that's the thing. Another thing I can put into the unexpected, so to speak, when I first got into this business, the unexpected of how many different individuals, high profile, that you're going to deal with. That being said, though, you don't give any less service because everybody's spending their money. That's how I always have come to that. Like, everybody cares about their dollars being spent. So I don't give any less service. And I definitely feel like the middle of the field events for people who want to just throw those, who find a plot of land and feel like this plot of land is special and they want to throw an event there, trying to erect everything it takes to make that happen are definitely the most difficult.
You're right, about the logistics of pulling an event somewhere in the middle of a field somewhere. I remember, right, in our transition from virtual to hybrid events, I think this was beginning of 2021, right before we took a break again and went back to virtual and then came back to hybrid. We went back to in person. I mean, what a fiasco, right? But I remember we were doing a gala, and it was a hybrid gala, and it was in the middle of a field, like winery field. And at the time when we tested, the internet infrastructure, everything was fine. The day of the event, when you brought in a bunch of people, the separate broadband that was created just for supporting our stream was basically cannibalized by everyone that was there. So I remember like walking with a stick, and we had this T-Mobile broadband little Wi-Fi thing that we were like trying to get the best signal that we could get to keep our stream going.
Yes, one of the many issues.
Because we're like, okay, this in a real life situation, we shouldn't be doing this again.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes you don't know that until you're doing it, right? So sometimes you don't realize it until you're in the middle of the field and the event is happening.
Well, it's the day of, and it's at 5 p.m. and we're kicking it off, and the internet was stable and running just fine. And here comes a half an hour before the event, and it starts dropping, and it keeps dropping. And you're like, this ain't good. Like, what other plan B do we have right now? Keep in mind, this is first event right after we come back from doing virtual events for a year and a half. And now we're like, let's do a hybrid, because everybody's like, want to do it. But also we have this audience that we, gathered over a year and a half of virtual. Oh, and we also want to go to like this place, winery in the middle of nowhere, and pull it off,
Yeah. Those are the most rewarding, to be honest with you. When you pull those off, you feel pretty good about yourself when you're executing on that level,
It was fun. It was definitely like one of those moments of this would make a great TikTok moment later. Right now, let's just make it happen.
That's hilarious.
It was fun. We did, manage to make the stream happen and keep it stable. But yeah, it was one of those things like, yeah, keep walking to the left. Now stop. Okay, do not move.
Oh my God.
Anyway, piggybacking on our previous topic, as we were talking about high profile events, anything else that you feel like would be beneficial for anyone that would want to tackle some of those events? Any top tips that you want to provide before we move into our next segment?
Going back to the same thing I said before, humanizing. So this is going to be very difficult on your first high profile event. When you're doing your very first high profile event, especially maybe if you like the person, maybe because sometimes you're doing these high profile events and your teammates don't even know who this person is. So it doesn't matter as much. It's just another day for them. But if you're the person that's managing it, running it, throwing it, it can be intimidating. But once you've done it one time, the biggest thing I would say is after being around some of these people in certain settings is they're all human. Just humanize the person and then just treat it like another event. Much easier said than done. But after you've done a couple of them, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about.
I remember having the opportunity to actually meet Arnold Schwarzenegger in person, like side by side. And I'm having this conversation with the Terminator, right? And I'm trying so hard not to use the voice.
Right. Absolutely. Isn't it?
Because I'm like, difficult. I don't want to embarrass myself right now. But it's like really so hard to contain myself.
I'm pretty sure he hears that all the time. He has to,
I'm sure. So that's why I'm like, I need to act all professional here. It's like, I can't be doing this. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, just use it once, just once, like, see what happens.
That's hilarious.
All right. So as we move into our next segment here, as I mentioned in the introduction, the focus of the podcast this season is mental and physical fitness. And when it comes to my own strategies that work for me, which, might not work for everyone else, and that's okay. But I know what works for me. And I know that when I'm going through a very busy season, I have to be very aware of my own limitations and also know what is my capacity for doing all the things. And I tend to do all the things because I just can't stop myself. Resting for me is hard. Sometimes, I would just like ponder upon what do people do when they rest? I don't have that concept. I'm working on it, okay? For me, rest means getting a really good workout at the gym, even though I'm not sitting, right? Like I'm not resting like normal people rest. When you're a business owner, you're in the hustle, you know what it is. Like you have your own business, you have a podcast, you do events, you might freelance for events, you might be going in different places, you travel for events. I mean, there are so many things that end up piling on top of you that if you don't keep working at enlarging your capacity, may that be mentally and physically, there is not going to be a moment where you're just going to keep going, because you're going to hit a wall. You're going to burn out. That's the reality. I don't know anyone that hasn't done that when they just ran 100 miles per hour all the time. So when it comes to your own strategies to keep yourself physically and mentally fit and healthy, grounded, and capable to tackle all the challenges that might come your way, what are some of your strategies that you use to keep your body fit and your mind sharp?
You hit on one. I like going to the gym or hitting the treadmill before work. I usually hit the treadmill before work, something like that, just to kind of clear my mind and something like that. For people who aren't really into the gym, because that's easy for me and you to say, because we're already there, so it's easy. Nothing special we got to do.
Yeah, exactly. Not going is hard.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I think you hit on part of it, Uncle, is that you got to find a way to shut it off at some point. Give yourself some kind of work-life balance, because events, depending on if you're planning them and you are executing them as well, that could take up your entire life, like easily. It could easily take your entire life. And that might be just for one event for a certain few months. And you got another one coming right after it. Yeah. So with me, I just maintain a work-life balance. I have hard cutoffs for things. I will separate. My actual life is very much divorced from events. None of my friends do events. None of my day-to-day life has anything to do with events whatsoever. So I'm able to get away from it 100%. And for some people, maybe that's your kids. Maybe that's going to kids' games. For some people, maybe that's going to movies, going for a walk in the park, doing something that just separates you 100% from events, because the stress of it, the anxiety of executing events, because they're done on a timer, like you don't get to hang out, like they're done on an itinerary. It can be super stressful, and I couldn't imagine living in that 24/7.
Absolutely. And you actually make a good point there, because it's been so many times when, I would have some girlfriends be like, oh, we want to do an event. Do you want to plan it? I'm like, no. I want to attend it.
Right. Absolutely.
Just because I plan events does not mean that I'm going to volunteer for everyone else's event, because let me tell you, I want to break away from that, because that professional life is great, but I don't want it in my personal life. My personal life should be void of all the stress, anxiety that comes with it.
Yes, 100%. I would say 1,000%. If you're able to divorce yourself from it, even for a day or so, just give yourself some personal time. Find that personal time. It'll reward you later.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, Reggie. And in closing, take a moment to share with our audience 3 practical tips on how to anything that from your life experience you feel like you'll be useful for our audience.
For sure. So I'm going to say the 3 things, and then I'll kind of frame them. So 1 is be confident. 2 is know your client and their expectations. So that active listening there, seeing what their concerns are, so that you can give constructive feedback and keeping things in perspective. With a lot of these events, we're not saving kids from burning buildings here. And I tell my teammates this all the time when they get overwhelmed, or I see somebody running like a chicken with their head cut off and they're so stressed about things. The weight of the world doesn't depend on this event. I understand that you want to execute, but if you're in a position where you're so high stress, a lot of times you're not able to think clearly. You need to be able to think clearly, especially if you're dealing with teammates. They don't need to see the person that's giving them instructions and helping lead them running around, because it has an influencing effect on them. That if you don't have a plan, they're like, oh, we're screwed for this entire event. Like, we're all of us. So I feel like for one is just having that confidence, learning from what you have done before. So me personally, that confidence just comes from doing like over 1,000 events. I've done so many events that I have confidence in it because I've done it. And that's not because I feel like I'm coming in and just knowing everything, but I know what I've learned from the past. And you have to do that. You have to be able to look constructively at, if you're in a leadership position, did you put your teammates in the best perspective? If you dropped the ball from what a client expectation, did you listen to that client enough thoroughly to see what their concerns were to try to take care of that? And then just being confident in your plan. Develop a plan and be confident in executing your plan, because that confidence goes a long way for clients. Just like your teammates don't want to see you running around crazy. That's the last thing a client wants to see. They're looking at you running around crazy. I've had them tell me sometimes when I'm training other managers, they'll be like, I don't know, she's running around a lot. and
something seems wrong. I don't know what, but it makes me anxious.
It's making them anxious. Exactly. Because Uncle, like you said before, they're already anxious, right? They're coming in anxious. So you're not helping to alleviate that anxiety by not being confident in a plan that you create. So just make sure you're giving these events the proper time and the proper kind of respect they deserve. That people are spending a lot on these events. They're putting their reputation on the line. They're hoping they go great. So just making sure that you're kind of tuned into all that.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to pick on actually is this idea of like knowing that you have executed so many different type of events and you had to, many times come up with solutions on the fly for a lot of those
Yes.
events. Whatever it is that you're walking into next, you know that you have a bit of experience on tackling any challenge. So it's from experience that you're pulling to be able to resolve and provide the best solution possible. And that is something that a lot of people don't understand how important it is when it comes to choosing the right partner, choosing the right event professional to work with them. I've actually had this conversation with someone where they wanted the strategy session to talk them through what the event needs. And, I had to be straight up forward with them and say, hey, if you want me to talk about me and what I've done, that's free. That's not going to cost you anything. But the moment we start talking about your event and you want me to pull on all the years of experience that I've had to make your event better, that has to cost you something. You can't just expect to receive for free something that tactical steps that you can implement for event to get better, because then I'm out of business. What's the point of me being in business for so long and gathering all these years of experience if you don't trust that if you pay me what I'm worth, I can help your event? And as event professionals, I feel like sometimes we have to draw the line between, yes, I don't mind having discovery meetings upon discovery meetings, but the moment we start talking about your event and how to make it better or implement strategies for your event, there has to be some line in the sand where it says, now I'm on the clock.
Yes, absolutely. Because you're basically consulting at that point, and people don't tend to consult for free.
Last time I tried to call a lawyer and ask for advice, they're like, I'm going to bill you $1,000. And I'm like, I didn't even ask you your name yet. Anyway, it's a totally side conversation that I feel like it has to be had, because a lot of people, the event professionals that we are, we don't have the confidence to be that straight up with our pricing, especially when you're a small business owner, you're just trying to get off the ground. But after a certain number of years, it is time to have those, conversations and be willing to say no to some people, because I'm not going to keep giving advice for free. That's the truth. Anyway, I am so happy that we got to do this. We got to hear from your experience and all the things that you have done. It sounds like there's definitely so much more to be talked about. We're running out of time right now. So just in closing, where can our audience connect with you if they want to, learn more about you, where they can find you?
You can do reginatl.com or just on Twitter, which I think is RTJNATL, which is, my social media is horrible. Maybe by the time this actually airs, it'll be a lot better. But you can definitely reach out to me there. And I think the same thing for LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn just do like Reggie Johnson. I've never looked at my LinkedIn to see. What's funny is that when you mentioned my LinkedIn, I actually had to look at it. And I'm like, well, because when you get doing the same thing all the time, it's kind of like you check it off. A lot of people don't. It's like dusting off a resume, right? You don't dust it off until you need it. So then when you asked about my LinkedIn, I'm like, wow, let me look at it and see. But I am on there if anybody wants to reach out.
Well, the truth is, as a business owner and entrepreneur, LinkedIn is the place to get your leads. But LinkedIn is the place to build a business. I think it's only relevant for people that really are hustling for their own business, because I've worked for other event production companies before, and it's always a stream of events, flow of events that come in. But when it's my thing, I got to sell it, and I also got to execute it, and I got to do all the planning for it, all the things, right? But all of that, it's on me. And sometimes I feel like I am the worst boss I've ever had.
Can you fire yourself? How does that work?
I cannot work hard enough for this boss because it keeps demanding more hours out of me. Oh my gosh, what is happening? Chill out.
Oh, that's wild.
All right. Well, this is it for today's episode. Thank you again, Reggie, for joining me and for sharing from your wealth of experience. And thank you for everyone that joined us today. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our episodes coming out on video on our YouTube channel. And in the meantime, stay healthy, fit, and joyful. We will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to review it, rate it, and share it with other event professionals that could benefit from it. Connect with us on social at Events Demystified Podcast. We would love to hear from you and what you're up to. If you'd like to learn more about Tree Fan Event services and find out if we're a good fit in supporting your event, can we help your event be successful with a 20-minute free consultation? Link in the episode's notes. Thanks for tuning in.